I found out my husband missed our child's birth, but an unexpected nurse gift changed everything. The fluorescent lights flickered weakly above the cramped living room where Rachel Turner sat alone, her hands resting gently on the soft curve of her belly. Outside, the gray drizzle tapped against the window, matching the somber mood that filled the small apartment she shared with James. It was a modest space, filled with second-hand furniture that whispered stories of thrift store bargain hunts and late nights stretching to make ends meet. The faded wallpaper peeled at the edges, and the air smelled faintly of baby powder and old coffee, a testament to the many sleepless nights and nervous preparations that had led to this moment. Rachel's life had never been easy, but she'd faced every hardship with a quiet strength that surprised even herself. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, she learned early on that dreams didn't fall from the sky. They had to be wrung from sweat and sacrifice. When she met James, a charming man with big ambitions, she had believed they could build something lasting, a life beyond the struggles that had defined her childhood. But as the months passed and the pregnancy settled into the routine of doctor's appointments and whispered fears, it became painfully clear that their worlds were drifting apart. James was always busy, late-night meetings, phone calls that never ended, and a distracted demeanor that seemed to grow colder with each passing day. Rachel tried not to notice the late dinners eaten alone, the unanswered texts, or the way his eyes would flicker away when she mentioned the baby's kicks. Her heart ached quietly, but she buried the hurt beneath layers of hope. She told herself that when the baby came, everything would change. James would be there. He would hold her hand through labor, cradle their newborn son, and the pieces of their fractured family would finally fit together. But that afternoon, as Rachel's contractions grew fierce and unrelenting, the small hope she had left started to wither. The taxi ride to the hospital was a blur of sharp pains and trembling breaths. Nurses ushered her through sterile hallways where the scent of antiseptic mingled with the distant cries of newborns. She pressed the call button repeatedly, longing to see James's face, hear his reassuring voice, feel his presence, dissolve the fear tightening her chest. But hours slipped by, marked only by the relentless ticking of the wall clock and the changing shifts of indifferent hospital staff. When Rachel finally opened her eyes between contractions, she saw the empty chair by her bedside, and a sinking, chilling realization settled in. James was nowhere to be found. She tried to ignore the whispering voices and the sidelong glances exchanged between the doctors and nurses. The other women in the maternity ward had partners and family members, sharing tears of joy or wiping away nervous sweat. Meanwhile, Rachel faced the most vulnerable moment of her life, utterly alone. It wasn't just the absence that stung. It was the silence that followed his no-show. The muted murmurs of other patients, the half-hidden smirks exchanged among hospital personnel, and the palpable weight of pity that crushed her shoulders like a relentless storm. In a place that was supposed to be filled with light, warmth, and new beginnings, Rachel felt cold and exposed. She wished she could disappear, but the ground beneath her trembled with every contraction, forcing her to stay present in the most harrowing ordeal. She fought back tears as she gazed over the infant bassinets lined against the window, a sea of families united that only emphasized her isolation. Doubts crept into her mind like shadows. Was she not enough for James? Had she driven him away? The questions gnawed at her until the sting of humiliation became almost unbearable, a raw ache beneath her skin. For all her strength, Rachel's world was breaking, piece by fragile piece, and yet within that crushing moment, her thoughts flickered towards the child growing inside her, a boy who depended on her courage now more than ever. A mother at heart, she took a shaky breath and clutched the small, worn photograph of her family, a relic from happier times, and whispered to herself, "I will be enough." Though the night was dark and the world seemed cruel, Rachel's spirit, though battered, refused to break. Have you ever felt so alone during your hardest moments that hope seemed impossible to grasp? Sometimes, the quietest battles forge the strongest souls. What would you do if faced with a choice to stand tall despite the weight of abandonment? The sterile fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor stretched endlessly ahead as Rachel was wheeled toward the delivery room. Her heart pounding not only from the intensity of labor, but from the gnawing emptiness gnashing at her insides. The painful contractions gripped her body relentlessly, each wave drawing forth a well of tears that she fought desperately to suppress. As the elevator doors slid open, the buzz of voices and laughter from a nearby father waiting room pierced the heavy silence surrounding her, a brutal reminder of what she lacked. She caught sight of couples smiling in anticipation, hands intertwined, sharing promises she had silently yearned for but felt increasingly denied. Minutes later, Rachel's doctor, a kind-faced woman with steady eyes, offered quiet reassurances that did little to soothe the storm raging within Rachel's chest. The nurse assigned to her, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and nimble hands, busied herself setting up the room quietly. Yet despite their professionalism, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that the staff's subtle glances held a shade of pity. One nurse whispered among herself as she passed by, a glance exchanged with the receptionist that made Rachel's stomach twist with humiliation. She could almost hear the unspoken questions. Where's the father? Does she even matter? The hours crawled by as Rachel endured agonizing waves of pain, each surge a test of her endurance. James's absence was no longer just a personal betrayal. It felt like a public spectacle, a source of whispered judgment she could neither escape nor control. Occasionally, the hospital room door creaked open, and she turned hope into despair again when she saw not her husband, but a nurse or a doctor checking vitals, offering brief professional smiles that failed to touch her soul. Her phone sat silently on the bedside table, its screen dark and cold, a stark contrast to the warmth and support she sought, yet could not grasp. Through it all, Rachel's mind raced with anger and confusion. How could James choose work, meetings, and deadlines over the birth of his own child? Was she invisible to him now? Her thoughts spiraled darker with every passing moment, the loneliness feeding a growing storm of resentment. She imagined the conversations he might be having, celebrating career milestones, while she wrestled with pain and fear alone, bringing new life into the world without her partner by her side. And when James finally arrived, it was too late. The delivery was hours past its peak, the raw exhaustion painting his face when he appeared in the doorway. His eyes flickered with a shallow apology, but it was drowned beneath Rachel's icy glare and the cold distance she kept. Rooms once filled with hopeful light now seemed shadowed with unspoken grievances. His attempt to grasp her hand was met with a refusal so firm it felt like a barrier between them, an invisible wall born from all the broken promises and unmet expectations. As the newborn's cries filled the air, Rachel's humiliation reached its crescendo. A mother abandoned in the very moment she needed support most, exposed to the judgment not only of strangers, but of the very man she had hoped would be her rock. Tears threatened to spill freely, but she clenched her jaw, fighting to maintain some shred of dignity in a situation designed to dismantle it. Yet even in this moment of profound heartbreak, a faint spark ignited when Clara, the head nurse with kind eyes and a softness that contrasted the bustling, sterile environment, approached her quietly. Clara's presence was grounding, a subtle anchor in the swirling chaos. She offered a gentle smile without words, a small act of recognition that Rachel was not invisible, that someone saw her pain and sorrow. That small connection, fragile as it was, slowed the tide of despair just enough to make Rachel wonder if maybe, just maybe, the night held more than just darkness. Stories like Rachel's, of crushing disappointment, public shame, and the burden of loneliness, are more common than people realize. Have you ever felt the sting of being judged silently, your pain invisible to everyone but a select few? In moments where hope seems lost, who do you lean on? Sometimes, unspoken kindness is the first step toward healing. The hours following childbirth melted into a hazy blur for Rachel. Her body, battered from labor, lay exhausted beneath the thin hospital blanket, while her mind churned with a tumult of emotions that refused to settle. The sharp sting of betrayal wove itself tightly around her heart, each beat echoing James's absence like a relentless drum. Though her son, small, fragile, and utterly dependent, slept peacefully in the bassinet beside her, Rachel's world felt heavier than ever, anchored by loneliness that no medication could dull. Despite the physical pain, it was the emotional wound that cut deepest, a raw emptiness that gnawed at her soul. James had left soon after the birth, offering a vague excuse about urgent meetings and unexpected work calls. His eyes, once filled with the promise of shared dreams, now avoided hers, holding a mirror to the disconnect that had grown between them. Rachel watched him retreat, the slam of the apartment door resounding like the final echo of their fractured relationship. In those silent moments, she wrestled with a cyclone of doubt and shame. Was she wrong to expect him? Had she misjudged the man she married, hoping he would stand by her side during the most critical moment of their lives? The hospital room, though sterile and cold, became a refuge and a prison at once. Nurses came and went with clinical efficiency, speaking in hushed tones that allowed no room for genuine comfort. Rachel found herself withdrawing, the warmth she craved replaced with a stifling sense of isolation. She hardly answered visitors' polite questions, offering weak smiles that barely masked her vulnerabilities. Night stretched endlessly, and with it came creeping fears, the possibility of raising their child alone, the weight of responsibility pressing relentlessly on her fragile shoulders. Yet amidst the shadowed corridors of despair, small moments of light began to emerge. Clara, the head nurse who had first offered a kind glance during delivery, visited regularly with a warm smile that pierced the gray gloom. Unlike the hurried professionalism of others, Clara took time, sometimes just a few minutes, to sit by Rachel's bedside, offering quiet conversation and gentle encouragement. She spoke not as a nurse to a patient, but as a woman who understood pain and resilience in equal measure. In Clara's company, Rachel found a tentative ally, someone who acknowledged her fears without judgment and offered support without strings. One afternoon, Clara approached Rachel with a small, worn notebook, its cover faded, the pages filled with handwritten letters from mothers who had faced similar moments of abandonment and struggle. "These are their stories," Clara said softly, placing the volume in Rachel's trembling hands. "You're not alone in this. Many have been where you are, and they've found strength to rise again." The notebook became a lifeline, a mirror reflecting shared anguish and, more importantly, shared hope. With each story she absorbed, Rachel felt the tight grip of despair loosen ever so slightly. Despite these flickers of hope, doubt still gnawed at Rachel's resolve. She questioned her worth as a partner, a mother, even as she cradled her son close, marveling at the surge of fierce love that stirred within her. Pangs of loneliness battled against the growing ember of self-reliance kindling in her chest. In quiet moments through the long nights, she whispered promises, to herself and to the baby, that she would be his protector, his unshakable foundation, no matter what storms lay ahead. Isolation, after all, has a way of sharpening the soul. Rachel's internal dialogue became a battlefield where vulnerability met defiance. She recalled voices from her past, the stern yet loving words of her mother, reminding her of the strength that flows from struggle, the memories of childhood hardships that had forged resilience like tempered steel. Could she summon that strength now, not as a daughter, but as a mother determined to build a new future for her child? Have you ever faced crushing obstacles that seemed designed to break your spirit? When surrounded by silence and shadows, how did you find that flicker of light to guide you forward? Rachel's journey was far from over, but the first seeds of courage had taken root. Sometimes, when the world turns its back, the smallest gestures, a smile, a shared story, a simple presence, can become the pillars that hold us upright. Days bled into nights in the sterile confines of the hospital room, where Rachel found herself stranded between exhaustion and an abyss of despair. The initial shock of James's absence had settled into a dull ache, a constant companion whispering doubts and fears that clung to her like shadows in the dim light. She battled waves of loneliness that crashed relentlessly against fragile resolve, and yet an unexpected depth of strength began to surface. Forged in the crucible of betrayal and sleepless nights spent cradling her newborn son, but the abyss deepened unexpectedly one cold evening when a nurse, seemingly overwhelmed by the counter's chaos, accidentally reprimanded Rachel in front of the other patients, commenting with a biting edge on her lack of support during labor. The words stung sharply, cutting through the veneer of composure Rachel had so carefully built. Heads turned, eyes flicked knowingly, and whispers snaked through the room like poisonous snakes. The humiliating spectacle crushed her further, a stark reminder that society too judged her, not just James's betrayal. Rachel's breath hitched. The walls seemed to closing tighter as she struggled to choke back tears. It was the lowest point she could remember, a moment when the cumulative weight of abandonment, judgment, and loneliness threatened to drown her. A part of her crumbled, the fierce flame of hope flickering as exhaustion threatened to snuff it out completely. The world felt unforgiving, cold, and isolating, leaving her vulnerable in a way she'd never imagined possible. Then, just when it seemed all light had shifted away, Clara appeared, a quiet storm of compassion in scrubs. Her eyes, steady and kind, met Rachel's before she silently handed her a simple package wrapped carefully in soft blue cloth. "For you," Clara said softly, her voice like a gentle balm that soothed raw wounds. Inside was not just a gift, but a profound act of solidarity, a leather-bound journal, its cover worn yet inviting. It was the same journal Rachel had glimpsed days before, filled with stories, poems, and messages from mothers who had lived through abandonment and loneliness. Clara's gesture cracked open a door in Rachel's soul. That very night, with shaky fingers and a heart swollen with a mix of doubt and fragile hope, Rachel opened the journal. Within its pages lay a chorus of voices, a collective testament of resilience, courage, and the unswerving power of motherly love. Mothers who had once stood alone, ridiculed and scorned, now found solace in their shared stories, their pain transformed into strength. Rachel read about sacrifices, fierce independence, moments of despair turned to determination, and most importantly, the unbreakable bond between mother and child. Unexpectedly, this fragile connection transformed Rachel's world. The gift was more than words on paper. It was a lighthouse, guiding her through the storm of rejection towards a future where she didn't have to be broken. She began to understand that her worth was not measured by James's absence, nor by the whispered condemnations. Instead, it was embedded in the unshakable love she held for her child and the indomitable spirit growing from within. The hospital room no longer felt like a cage, but a canvas, one she could paint with her own story of survival and triumph. That evening, as the dim lights flickered outside her window and the baby slept soundly beside her, Rachel made a silent vow to herself. She would not let humiliation define her. She would rise, not just for her son, but for herself. Meanwhile, in a starkly contrasting world, whispers about Rachel's situation had reached James's ears. His face, once confident and unshakable, now showed the first hints of regret and anxiety. It was clear he hadn't anticipated the true cost of his absence, nor the strength it would ignite in Rachel. The reckoning was approaching. Have you ever experienced a moment so dark that only a simple act of kindness lit the way forward? Who in your life has shown unexpected compassion when you needed it most? Sometimes the smallest ifs become the turning point that changes everything. The morning sun filtered through the thin hospital curtains, casting fragile patterns of light across Rachel's weary face. But beneath the exhaustion, a fire burned brighter than ever. The journal Clara had gifted her lay open on the bedside table, its pages a wellspring of strength that Rachel revisited like a sacred prayer. With every word she absorbed, her sense of self, long battered and bruised, rebuilt itself, steady and resolute. The once suffocating weight of betrayal transformed into fuel for the long road ahead. When James returned to the hospital that day, hesitant, eyes heavy with a mixture of guilt and apprehension, Rachel was no longer the woman who had cried alone in sterile rooms. His whispered apologies and insincere promises met the steeliness of a woman transformed. She met him not with tears, but with a calm that unsettled him. "I needed you," she said quietly, voice steady. "But I was the one who stayed. I was the one who fought." James struggled, stumbling over words, attempting to justify his neglect with excuses that sounded hollow in the presence of her newfound strength. For the first time, he saw not a fragile wife, but a mother and a woman fiercely committed to her child and herself. The cold distance between them began to dissolve, but the road to forgiveness would require more than words. Rachel's transformation was not just personal, it rippled outward. When she left the hospital with her son cradled in her arms, she met Clara's proud gaze, the nurse's smile radiating unspoken support. The stories in the journal were not just words, they became a promise, a testament that Rachel now carried forward. Through community groups, she found other mothers who had walked similar paths, and together they built a shield against judgment and isolation. Facing James one last time before moving out, Rachel confronted the man who had once overshadowed her life with ambition and neglect. With quiet dignity, she laid bare her wounds, her resilience, and her refusal to accept anything less than respect and partnership. James, stripped of his arrogance, looked on with the dawning realization of what he had lost, not just a wife, but the family he'd taken for granted. He promised to change, to be present for his son, and to mend the fractured bonds. But Rachel's resolve made it clear. Respect must be earned through action. Her journey wasn't easy. There were days when doubt clawed back, when the memories of humiliation threatened to resurface. Yet, each challenge was met with a courage born from the lessons of that journal, the kindness of Clara, and the deep, unyielding love of a mother determined to protect her child. Rachel discovered an inner sanctuary where her past pain was transformed into power, and her scars became symbols of survival. This transformation was celebrated quietly but fiercely by those who witnessed it, the hospital staff who saw her rise from despair, the mothers who connected through shared experience, and most importantly, by Rachel herself. She became a beacon of hope for many, embodying the truth that pain does not define us, our response to it does. Have you ever faced a turning point where standing firm opened doors to new beginnings? How do you reclaim dignity after betrayal? Rachel's story shows that even in our lowest moments, we can find the strength to rewrite our narratives and demand the respect we deserve. Months later, the small apartment that Rachel had chosen to call home echoed with new life and hope. It wasn't grand or rich with luxury, but it was filled with laughter, soft baby coos, and an unshakable spirit that Rachel had woven into every corner. Each worn blanket, each colorful drawing taped on the walls, told a story of resilience, a testament to how far she had come from the broken woman who had once faced the cold sterility of the hospital alone. Now, She was radiant with a quiet confidence born not of ease, but of victory. Rachel stood by the window one crisp morning, watching her little boy play on a thick blanket spread across the floor. His chubby hands reached for a rattle that jingled brightly, his eyes wide with wonder and trust. In that moment, Rachel's heart swelled with an indescribable gratitude, knowing that despite everything, she had given him the greatest gift, a mother's unwavering love and strength. The scars of her journey remained, but they were no longer wounds. They were badges of honor, symbols of endurance and hope. The relationship between Rachel and James had evolved in complicated ways. Though they remained apart, there was a mutual respect that grew slowly with each honest conversation and shared decision for their child's future. James's earlier neglect had cost him dearly, but he had begun a difficult path towards redemption, learning what it truly meant to be present, not just in body, but in heart. Rachel recognized that forgiveness was not a gift she could give lightly. It was a process that required genuine change and humility. And in the meantime, she stood firmly as the primary guardian of their son's world. Clara's unexpected kindness had set the wheels in motion when Rachel had felt most vulnerable, and that gesture rippled beyond its initial impact, inspired. Rachel now volunteered at the hospital, offering support to new mothers who faced challenges like hers: loneliness, fear, and judgment. Through her compassion and honesty, Rachel became a beacon of hope, a living example that even in the darkest valleys, the human spirit could rise, rebuild, and flourish. She reminded others that no one's worth was determined by the presence or absence of others, but by the courage to keep moving forward. Her story, once marked by pain and humiliation, now stood as a powerful message. Resilience is born in the face of adversity, and the bonds forged by empathy and kindness can transform lives. The journal Clara had given her remained close, a treasured keepsake that had started it all and continued to inspire every chapter of her new life. Have you ever witnessed how a single act of kindness can change someone's life? Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest power to heal and transform. Rachel's journey is a testament to that truth, a reminder that no matter how dark the night, dawn always breaks with promise. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. See you in our next story.